Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Chronic here on this Destiny 2 video, and today we're going to be taking a look at one of my favorite Grandmaster Nightfall Divinity Hunter builds for Destiny 2. So, this is a PvE Grandmaster Nightfall Hunter build that is built around using the Shadowshot Super and Divinity Exotic Special. Using a combination of Austringer with Unstoppable Rounds and Divinity, which has Overload rounds, you can handle most champion abilities with strong utilitarian guns. Your Shadowshot Super has incredible utility for killing large groups of enemies, weakening hard enemies to take 25% more damage, and using it more often with Orpheus Rig. And finally, you have the ability to go invisible at any time you're about to die or revive a teammate in a hard location, which is a big part of this build. Moving on, let's get into the specs of this build. So the class and subclass is going to be the Hunter, Void, Way of the Trapper. I personally like using the Void Wall Grenade, Marksman's Dodge, and Triple Jump. For the weapons, I like using Austringer, Divinity, and Wendigo. Obviously, there are a few weapons in here that are going to be sunset, so I like using Old Fashioned as a good 140 hand cannon kinetic replacement for Austringer. And of course, Interference 6 for a good Arc 120 RPM grenade launcher replacement for Wendigo, which actually has some pretty good perks, including spike grenades, field prep, auto loading, lots of really good stuff. I think it also has full court, lots of great stuff on Interference. Alternatively, you can also use Hammerhead if you need void damage for breaking certain void shields, and of course swords, which there's a lot of great swords, specifically Guillotine is pretty popular these days to be able to nuke down different bosses that you can do with a bubble. It really depends which Nightfall you're doing. Up next, we have the armor section, probably the most important and the most detailed section of this build. Now, the way I built this build is not the only way to build this. You could probably move some stuff around and get a slight bit more optimal. I just optimized it as much as I could possibly see. But you can also not have certain parts of this and be totally fine. The general idea behind all of the different pieces is, firstly, you want to get as much special ammo for your divinity as possible. That is the crux of your build, being able to have as much divinity as possible. Secondly, try to have as much of those resistances as you can. The boss resist, mage resist, concussive dampener, and the elemental resist really helps in keeping you alive. For the seasonal mod, I go with a high energy fire seasonal mod setup. So I have high energy fire, stacks on stacks, taking charge, and shield break charge, as well as the artifact mod known as counter charge to get a lot of freaking charge with light. I'm pretty much with charge with light at all times because there are so many different ways you can get it. And another artifact mod that we have for this season is called Oppressive Darkness, which allows your void grenades to weaken enemies. And with your void wall grenades, that allows you to weaken the same enemy that's not moving many times, allowing them to take 25% more damage just from your grenade. And a very big part of this build, you are the super support. You have the divinity support, you have the Oppressive Darkness support, you have the tether support, you have the smoke bomb support, you have the invisibility reviving support. And the final bit of it is going to be mobility and class ability regeneration with perpetuation and of course mobility, allowing you to get your dodge more often, to go invisible more often, which is a big part of this build. So when you're getting your armor set up for this, get as much mobility as you can, as well as recovery and a bunch of other standard stuff. And of course, at least 1 to 2 people in your squad should have special ammo finisher, and if that's going to be you, just replace perpetuation with that because it fits perfectly. Moving on to the gameplay portion, because the way you use this build is often just as important as the build itself. So to reiterate, this is a Grandmaster Nightfall build that is specifically designed to handle the difficult Nightfall champions and assist your team with Shadowshot, invisibility healing, and weakening tough enemy and bosses with your divinity. Your kinetic weapon Austringer is used for both red health enemies and Unstoppable Rounds utility. The divinity is obviously used for disrupting overload champions much easier than all primary ammo options, and of course weakening tough enemies and bosses. I can't tell you how many times I've been so thankful I had a divinity. As soon as we disrupt and stun a champion, I pop some divinity on that target, we see an Izanagi shot and a mountaintop hit it, and it is basically dead at that point, good for a finisher. And that's just really important for those champions because you need to burst them down very quickly before they can heal, which they heal very quickly. Your heavy weapon should be used mostly for utility, like breaking matching shields, DPS burst champions, and of course boss damage. Oftentimes you may not actually use your heavy weapon until the actual boss fight itself, because a lot of bosses you need that heavy to burst them down through the hardest part of that boss fight. For example, the current Nightfall, the Lake of Shadows, a lot of people have been just putting a bubble on him and just sorting the absolute crack out of him because that boss fight is really hard to try to deal with the enemy. Did I say beat the crack out of him? You know what? We're keeping it. Next, let's talk about the specific parts of the subclass gameplay. Firstly, your Shadowshot Super is a great support super with many functions and bonuses. Firstly, you can use it to kill large groups of close enemies with the tether share damage, while also weakening them for 25% more damage. With the exotic armor Orpheus Rig, you can also get up to 50% of your super back just by tethering enemies, and you get melee and grenade energy. And as such, you can use your Oppressive Darkness grenades more often, which also weaken affected enemies for more frequent weakening. The flow chart is often throw a grenade, weaken a bunch of enemies. After the weakening effect is gone and the grenade is gone, then you shoot at a tether. If you tether enough enemies, you get your grenade back. After the tether's gone, then you throw another grenade for a lot of weakening. Your melee smoke bomb should be used to shut down elite enemies and life-threatening enemies. And finally, your dodge makes you invisible, as I mentioned before, for really good survivability and reviving your teammates. Man, I do love myself a good invisibility in the morning. And the final section of this video, I wanted to talk about a few alternatives. The weapons are a pretty critical part of the build with a few alternatives. Obviously, Austringer can be switched out for the old-fashioned for a better Sunset 140 hand cannon, or you can go for the 110 hand cannons like True Prophecy if you want more range, which is very important in these Grandmaster Nightfalls, having good range, which is why I also recommend pulse rifles. Because we have unstoppable pulse rifle mods this season, it's a good long-range option, or alternatively, if you just want more range to your engagements, scout rifles and bows are very good long-range options that I usually crap on, but for Grandmaster Nightfalls, you don't want to be anywhere near enemies because you'll survive a lot longer. Generally, you just want to make sure you're using the longest range options that you can for staying safe, so anything with less range than a 140, like spare rations, requires you to get a lot closer, and that's a no-go for Grandmaster Nightfalls. And finally, there is no subclass alternative for this build, as it is built around having Shadowshot super and dodge invisibility. Your exotic is also a pretty critical part, allowing you to get your super more often, but you might find some efficacy from the graviton forfeit, so you can have longer invisibility when you do go invisible, which is also not a bad thing either. Just depends on what you want more. But generally, in Nightfalls, you want more supers. Almost always across the board, you want more supers. And that's pretty much it. That is the end of the video. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any questions, concerns. I do have one more iteration of these Grandmaster Nightfall builds that I want to make. That's going to be the Izanagi section with the Titan section of it. So you'll have all three major options. You don't have to use all three, but you'll have all these options, the different subclass and class options, the different weapon options. It'll be fun. And as the meta evolves and sunsets come through, I'll be making more of these. They'll most likely be slight tweaks, but we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, that's going to be the end of the video. Hope you guys did enjoy. My name's been Iconic, and I'll see you guys on the next one.